Welcome to Canadian Passages, a project that brings history to life with audio versions of archival material. These audiograms use digital voices to make historical writings accessible anytime, anywhere. The materials in this series come from the archives of the Canadian Forces Base Esquimalt, Naval and Military Museum. Please be warned that this content may contain language considered inappropriate by today's standards. The material is a product of its time and represents the context of the era, as well as the attitudes and opinions of those who created it. In the interests of historical integrity, editing has been done for clarity or brevity only, rather than for censorship. Patrick Willett Brock, or PWB, was born December 30, 1902, in Kingston, Ontario. He and his family moved to Vancouver in 1911 when his father became a professor at the University of British Columbia. In 1917, at age 14, PWB enrolled in Canada's Royal Naval College, and moved into the Royal Canadian Navy in 1920 as a midshipman. With the downsizing of Canada's naval service in 1921, he was forced to transfer to the Royal Navy, where he was nicknamed Canada Brock. Over the next 4 decades, he rose to Rear Admiral, one of only a few Canadians to achieve that rank. A prominent member of the naval community during his life, Rear Admiral Brock has been largely forgotten since his death in 1988. PWB was an avid writer throughout his life, and a collection of his letters, essays, and diaries are in the archives of the CFB Esquimalt Museum. These writings include first-hand accounts of major events of the 20th century, as well as the routine life of a Navy officer. Patrick Willett Brock spent most of the 1930s on Royal Navy ships operating out of Malta. The island was the official headquarters for the Mediterranean Fleet, offering one of the largest and most secure natural harbors in the region. Between the wars, the fleet was primarily engaged in routine peacetime duties and maintaining a strong presence in the region. At the beginning of 1933, Lieutenant Commander Brock was torpedo officer on HMS Mackay, part of the first destroyer flotilla in the Mediterranean. The following letters were written to his brother Thomas Leith Brock, who was attending the Royal Military College in Kingston, Ontario.
HMS Mackay, 1st Destroyer Flotilla, care of General Post Office, London. January 24, 1933, at Galaxidi. Accent on the CD. Dear Tommy, your massive 15-page epistle arrived this morning. I have the choice of writing a harried line to catch the last mail from here this afternoon or waiting till I have more time and posting it when circumstances permit. I have taken the former. I am very glad the book Fear and Be Slain catered to your requirements. A pet phrase that of the torpedo gunner's mate who nursed me through my long course. I sent Memoirs of a British Agent to Dad, by the way. Good book. Josephus was the greatest assistance to me, particularly in the long hours just before I arrived in Malta. I enjoyed it very much. We are just enjoying the winter cruise. A 3 weeks visit to the more God-forgotten ports in Greece to allow us to recover from the effects of the holiday season and to give the sportsman element a chance of shooting some non-existent birds. Galaxidi is a small town just off the Gulf of Corinth. About 1860 it was a very big ship-owning place, but its prosperity went out with sail and now it exists on the earnings of its emigrants and the memories of its former glories. Tomorrow we sail for a port which we only knew as Anchorage Z when we left Malta, but having been allowed to open a sealed envelope we find it is an open roadstead in the Gulf of Patras, not far from Missolonghi, where Byron died. Lord Byron is still a great Greek hero. Here we join the rest of the fleet, and aircraft from the furious and courageous have to find and attack us. Also submarines. My dear old sir, the V-class destroyers are money for old rope. The Ds, however, are full of gadgets that I've not had a real opportunity to master. Well, my old, I have been lurked to go ashore with the captain to look at some antiquities, which the local League of Youth is burning to show him. More from Anchorage Z perhaps, if RAD and the perishing burden give us any peace at all.
RAD stood for Rear Admiral, which in this case was Frank Forrester Rose, who served as the Rear Admiral destroyers in the Mediterranean from November 1931 until the end of 1933. He went on to be Commander-in-Chief of the Royal Navy East Indies Station. Rose was knighted in 1935 before being replaced in 1936 due to illness. The winter cruise was a major scheduled deployment of the fleet for intensive training exercises and a show-the-flag tour to various ports in the region. HMS Furious and HMS Courageous were aircraft carriers in the Atlantic Home Fleet and were conducting flying exercises off the northern coast of Africa in January 1933. HMS Mackay, was an Admiralty-type or Scott-class flotilla leader, built during the First World War, and recommissioned in 1931. After the interruption to go ashore, PWB continued his correspondence the following day.
January 25, 1933. I didn't mind Galaxidi. It was small, and the weather was grim, and once I had been to Delphi and seen its ancient ruins, there was not much to do. But still it was cheap, and the people did their very utmost to be hospitable and appreciated our return matches so much that there was quite a pleasant feeling about it all. We are proceeding westward to join that old monster RAD. We are rather a comic flotilla, Mackay, Vimiera, and 3 new Ds. It is unlikely that we shall be new and complete until May. The program is that after our return to Malta we have February as a practice period, and sail for the spring cruise early in March. The 3 Mediterranean flotillas are joining up with the 3 home fleet flotillas off Gibraltar, and terrific exercises ensue. After they are over and have wrought over them, the senior officers, the last of our old-timers, Mackay, Vimiera, Vivacious, and Vampire, sail for England to turn over to the last 4 Ds. Meanwhile, Captain D and staff have to be parked out in various ships. At present the arrangement is that I should accompany Captain D to the Defender and share a cabin with Flag, the Honorable Neville Archibald John Watson Ettrick Napier, our distinguished signal officer. You would never suppose that Flag suffers under the burden of all those names. He is a most pleasant and unassuming fellow.
Napier was a member of the Scottish peerage. The Honourable was a courtesy title as he was the second son of the 12th Lord Napier and 3rd Baron Ettrick. As Flag Lieutenant, he was part of the personal staff of the captain of the destroyer flotilla, known as Captain D. Flag was responsible for the signals sent from the flotilla leader to the rest of the ships. If Captain D wanted destroyers to change formation, it was the Flag Lieutenant's job to ensure those flags were hoisted correctly and instantly. Napier, who was born in 1904, served through the Second World War and reached the rank of lieutenant commander. Captain D was Captain Charles Frederick Harris, who held that appointment from 1932 until 1934. Harris was a distinguished Royal Navy officer whose career spanned both world wars. He was appointed a Companion of the Order of the Bath in recognition of his service. Vimiera, Vivacious, and Vampire were all V-class or W-class destroyers, built during the First World War. Defender was new, having been completed in October 1932. In addition to naval activities, the brothers often discussed writing letters to people they admired. Both brothers were interested in history, but Tommy was also trying to add to an autograph collection. Unfortunately, we do not have the letters from Tommy to which PWB responded, so we don't know the context of some of the comments.
HMS Mackay, off Missolonghi, January 29, 1933. Dear Tommy, many thanks for your letter of the 7th from your fine academy. You hadn't told me about your letter writing system, and I must say your success takes my breath away. I should be interested to hear Roger Key's views on Jutland. I've no doubt he'd have fought it differently if he had been invited to do so. You must indeed have a very fine manner. In an unguarded moment, I mentioned your success to someone in the wardroom who replied with a certain amount of assumed scorn. Oh well, if you write to people like Roger Keyes and Beatty, you ought to kick your brother's bottom. Both the two seem to divide people into 2 schools of thought, the enthusiastic admirers and the scoffers. I'm afraid I can't assist your collection except with this rather dud note from H.V. Morton, who wrote the search books. I wrote appreciating his writing, which is certainly very fine journalism, though possibly not literature, and pointing out some mistakes in the drill of priest of the parish, which he described in his last book, Blue Days at Sea. We sail tomorrow at 0700. And after fighting every inch of the way are billed to arrive at Malta on Wednesday morning. It would be well in keeping if the weather there were so bad as to make it impossible to get ashore. Destroyers have had a thin time at Anchorage Z. We've had to keep steam and set anchor watch a great deal of the time. In addition, Beagle dragged in the night and bumped Brazen. Akate's dented her bows going alongside an oiler. Daring's brand new capstan engine has refused duty. It's a shocking design and God only knows why it was allowed to go to sea. And Defender filled an oil tank so full that it burst the deck above and overflowed over everything. 2 of our new ships have to go to dockyard for repairs before they've been out of the builder's hands a dog watch. Shouldn't take long, but it oughtn't to be necessary at all.
Beagle and Brazen were B-class destroyers launched in 1930 and 1931. Akate's was an A-class destroyer built during the late 1920s, and was later sunk during the Battle of the Barents Sea in 1942. D-class destroyers, built in the early 1930s, were larger and faster with longer range. A's and B's had a complement of 130 to 140. D's had 140 to 150. Mackay, an Admiralty type or Scott-class flotilla leader, was physically larger, and designed to carry the flotilla commander, along with his tactical and administrative staff. She housed 15 to 20 extra officers and signalmen. By 1933, Mackay, launched in 1918, was a middle-aged veteran, leading a pack of new ships. While the Royal Navy Mediterranean Fleet was based in Malta, staying in the Grand Harbour too long was considered bad for morale and efficiency. Several times a year, the fleet dispersed on cruises to various ports before regrouping for large-scale exercises.
HMS Mackay, First Destroyer Flotilla at Malta, February 13, 1933. Dear Tom, life is rather full, what with one thing and another, and I find the flotilla rugger is quite a job in itself, and I don't know why I was young enough to think that new ships would mean less work. It is quite the reverse, as nothing appears to function yet, and the new officers don't know the drill. Trouble is, they won't RTB, read the bloody orders, and want everything handed to them on a plate. Even then, they drop it. However, the new Captain D is a masterman, which is a great blessing. In all respects, it is a pleasure to work for him. Some of our commanding officers are rather tough propositions, but I think he is just the man to deal with them. Suaviter in modo, fortiter in re, seems to be his line of country. The commanding officer of the Diana, one Commander Langley, is likely to be a bit of a menace. When he was a snotty, he invented a gunnery instrument. And as a sub, when he was asked in an exam at gunnery school to describe his toy, he merely replied, "See my handbook on the subject," with the result that whole island took a dislike to him. They wouldn't let him specialize in gunnery, so he went in for observing, and became one of the greatest living authorities on naval aviation. There is no disputing the fact that he is a brain of the first order, and if he can keep his tactlessness within limits, he will go a long way. He is alleged to have come to destroyers with the object of setting them right. I am hoping he won't have time to try to revolutionize torpedo guns is already full out trying to refute his gunnery heresies. I must admit that so far he has been exceedingly gracious to me, but feel that the tiger is merely gathering himself for a spring.
Commander Langley was Gerald Maxwell Bradshaw Langley, who qualified as an observer in 1923 and spent the majority of the interwar period on aircraft carriers. He is indeed credited with the invention of the Langley inclinometer, a visual fire control instrument used to determine the inclination of surface targets. As mentioned earlier, Captain D or Captain Destroyer was Charles Frederick Harris. The Latin phrase Brock used to describe Harris translates to gentle in manner, firm in execution. PWB expected to go with Harris to the next ship when Mackay was retired and believed that would be HMS Defender. But PWB's correspondence showed that plans changed unexpectedly and frequently. Brock was assigned to a completely different ship from Captain Harris, as reported to his brother Tommy, who must have asked his older brother for career advice in a recent letter.
HMS Mackay, First Destroyer Flotilla, at Malta, March 5, 1933. What cheer, horse! Very much thanks for your most excellent Valentine. You certainly give most excellent value for money when you take up the pen. No humor about the winter cruise intended. I think that one of its main objects is to give sportsmen a little shootin'. The distribution of the staff has again been altered, and I am now going to the Daring by myself. While it is a nuisance not being in the same ship as D1, there are great advantages in having a cabin to myself. You must have a masterly line of approach to get answers from the great, as you seem to do. These days, of course, it is terribly difficult to recommend any profession. Any of them is a speculation, but I fancy the Indian Army is more speculative than most. A weak government might well write it off. Even if it didn't, you would have to swallow Indianization in a large scale. I should think that next to the sappers, the gunners would be a good thing. They seem less idle and witless than the infantry, said he, with naval intolerance. The last few days have been terribly full with preparations for the spring cruise and routine work, farewell parties and other parties. I can compete with the work, but the social activity is getting me right down. I have been to an incredible number of cocktail parties since last Wednesday. There is a great temptation to give a cocktail party. It is such an easy and comparatively inexpensive form of entertainment, but so far we have not sunk to that yet.
In December 1931, Brock married Muriel Doreen Collinson, who went by Doreen. While PWB officially lived on board his ship, by 1933, he and Doreen had a house at 8 Strada Tigne Street, located in the heart of Slima, Malta, where she lived full-time. This was the premier residential area for British naval officers and their families. Living on Strada Tigre meant being close to the Union Club and the beaches of the front, where the British community spent their leisure time. The cocktail parties were likely held in this residential area. British naval officers were subject to a rigid social code, dictated by the Queen's regulations and Admiralty instructions, as well as unwritten naval tradition. Officers were expected to participate in a relentless cycle of social engagements as part of their professional duty. The letter highlights the pressure for officers and their wives to entertain, despite the financial strain.
We have had a foul spell of weather, and between that, and the requirements of the battleships and aircraft carriers, I haven't been able to fire a single torpedo from D's. Consequently, we shall have to take part in the combined exercises with the home fleet flotillas without having even worked together as a flotilla. I expect we shall look pretty silly, but it can't be helped. Not my fault, Senior. My brother from Gozo. Did you see that the Oxford Union passed a resolution by 275 votes to 140 odd? That this House will in no circumstances fight for king and country? Not very creditable, but it need not be taken too seriously. The Mackay had to go to sea in a rising gale last week to take a civil lord of the Admiralty, a mere army captain turned politician, whose responsibility only extends to dockyards and shore establishments. He was quite pleasant, however, and apologized to us for dragging us out of our comfortable. At any rate, he said, it will give you one more thing for which to curse the Board of Admiralty. I have got the D coming to supper. I've borrowed the captain's cabin for the occasion, and I hope to go ashore later to sleep at home when number 1 returns from the flicks. As we are sailing early on Tuesday, I think I'd better sleep on board tomorrow night. Adios, Cully. All the best.
The Oxford Union is a world-famous private debating society, primarily composed of members from the University of Oxford. Founded in 1823, it is one of Britain's oldest and most prestigious student organizations, though it remains independent from the university itself. The resolution PWB wrote about was related to the King and Country debate and the subsequent vote, which took place on February 9, 1933. The Oxford Union debate became a national scandal and a symbol of the ideological divide in Britain during the interwar period, and remains perhaps the most famous and controversial moment in the Union's history. Historically, this event caused a massive public outcry in Britain, occurring just weeks after Adolf Hitler had become Chancellor of Germany. It was seen by many at the time as a sign of growing pacifism and a lack of national resolve among the younger generation, which would be put to the test a few years later. Not my fault, Senior, my brother from Gozo, is a classic piece of lower-deck slang. In the 1920s and 30s, this phrase was known as the Maltese alibi. British officers were notorious for struggling to tell the local Maltese staff apart, so brother from Gozo became a convenient phantom scapegoat for every minor mishap on board. PWB's complaint about being unable to fire torpedoes from D's would again be referring to all the new D-class destroyers, several of which had already joined the flotilla and were being tested. In total, there were 9: Dainty, Daring, Decoy, Defender, Delight, Diamond, Diana, Duchess and Duncan. Highlights of Canada Brock's career include being a Navy cadet at the Halifax explosion of 1917. A junior officer on HMS Vindictive at the China Station at the start of the Chinese Civil War in the 1920s. Torpedo officer in the Mediterranean during the 1930s. Royal Navy Admiralty staff at the start of the Second World War. Executive officer on HMS Mauritius at the Sicily and D-Day landings. Senior naval officer at Schleswig-Holstein in post-war Germany. Captain of the HMS Kenya during the Korean War. And flag officer for the Middle East in the 1950s. Forced into retirement in 1958, Rear Admiral Brock became a maritime historian, authoring many essays and co-authoring the book, Steam and Sail, in Britain and North America. But he never wrote his biography. Thankfully, some of his story survived in letters, essays, diaries, and photographs. Museums and archives offer a wealth of primary sources such as those featured in this audiogram. These materials provide a spotlight on historical events and social history not found elsewhere. Letters and diaries, particularly, offer personal insights into the past. The Canadian Passages Project hopes to make unique materials held by CFB Esquimalt Museum more accessible to audiences around the world. This audiogram was produced by KM Lowe in collaboration with CFB Esquimalt Naval and Military Museum, which, unless otherwise noted, holds all rights to the original materials. This content, including but not limited to recordings, commentary, and images, is protected by Canadian and international copyright laws. All rights are reserved. No part of this production may be reproduced, distributed, or transmitted without prior written permission from the copyright holder, but links to the official version may be shared. For more information on this project, please visit canadianpassages.ca. Thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe for more content like this.